All right. This is the last class we're going to have on Proverbs for a bit. Next Wednesday, the night before Thanksgiving, we're going to have our annual prayer service that's going to be overseen by the elders. And then in December, I'm going to start teaching, continuing the class I had been teaching before on the life of Christ across the street in the annex on Sunday mornings. Wayne is going to take this class. I believe he is going to be talking on the book of Galatians. But at some point in the future, Lord willing, we'll come back in here and we'll pick it up. So we're going to get through chapter 7 tonight, and by getting through the end of chapter 7, we will finish basically all the main points in Proverbs that Solomon has to say about adultery. So last week, you'll remember that we were talking about, starting in verses 4 and 5 of chapter 7, he's basically saying you need to embrace wisdom from God concerning adultery. You need to embrace God's wisdom, keep it in mind, and watch out for the woman that does not belong to you that is going to try to entice you to commit adultery. And of course, he's talking a lot about the adulterous woman here because he's speaking to his sons, but everything that's said here applies not just to a woman who wants to commit adultery, but also to a man as well. We talked last week, just as a review, in verses 6 through 9 of chapter 7, the point he was making there is, do not be naive. Do not be naive and think that everything is going to turn out okay. We talked about that the adulterous woman dresses immodestly. We talked about modesty a lot last week. We also saw that she is wily of heart. In other words, she knows exactly what she's doing. She wants to seduce, and she's going to be very wily and cunning in how she does that. So we're going to continue tonight. Look at verse 11. Someone read verse 11 for me.
She was loud and rebellious. Her feet would not stay at home.
All right, so here are some things that we can pick up, some warnings that God is giving us about the one who would be trying to seduce, to commit adultery, and to commit any sort of fornication. Loud, verse 11 says. The Hebrew word for loud literally means boisterous, unrestrained, full of talk. Forward, that was in the lexicon. She's a forward person. What does it mean to be forward? You've heard that term. In this context, what does it mean to be forward? It is talking about you just said something to me, or you just did something to me, like maybe touched my shoulder or a hug or something like that, just a casual friend would not do. That's something more along the lines of a significant other, a husband or a wife would do, and you should not be doing that, so you're being forward. So it could be that since forward is one of the definitions there, that could be what he had in mind rather than loud. Another definition is full of rage. A lot of times, adultery happens kind of as I am very, very upset with my spouse and I'm going to get back at them. This is how I'm going to get back at them. So that's something to keep in mind too. Notice that verse 11 also says that she's wayward. New King James, New American Standard would say rebellious. King James would say stubborn. American Standard would say willful. All right, so this is someone who is basically a very stubborn, I'm going to do this type of person. But then notice it also says that her feet do not stay at home. This is a person that's not interested in her family or his family. They are more interested in finding new pastures, as it were. Because if they were interested in their family, then that's where they would be. They would be at home with their family. And so one thing, again, as those here who are in the older generation, if you're teaching your children, your grandchildren, these things, there comes a time in their lives, in their developments, where you should be talking to them about these things. This is something we've gone over with in this class before. But this is some of the things that you should be talking to them about. If you come across, like if your son or your daughter, they're in their, they're out of high school, they're in college, maybe they're out of college, they found someone, the proposal has been given, the date has been set. There's some things that you should be talking to them about. And this is one of them. After you get married, when you start your job, be on the lookout for someone who's very forward, someone who they might have their own family, but they're more interested in talking to you. They have their own husband, they have their own children, and yet they're texting you. They're reaching out to you. They're sending you the private messages on social media. Their feet are not staying at home. They're not putting all their attention on their own family. Watch out, because that's a red flag. That's the point of this verse. Now look verse 12. Now in the street, now in the market, and at every corner she lies in wait. In other words, she's out there. The people that are interested in fornication, they're out there in the public places. And what's the modern day lesson of that? Married people, and I don't care how old you are, this applies, okay? It's very, very foolish to go without your spouse to places that are known where the opposite sex is available, and they're oftentimes they want you to know that they're available. It's very, very foolish to go without your spouse you shouldn't be going to a bar anyway, or to a club anyway. But definitely do not go without your spouse being there, because if there's someone else of the opposite sex who's there alone, why are they there most times? Because they're looking for someone else who is alone, because they want to go home with you. If you're going to go to a festival, I'd like to go to that, so your favorite musician is in town, I'd like to go to that festival. I'd like to go see that concert. Honey, would you like to go with me? That's not really my thing. I understand that. We all have different music tastes, but, this might be where the for better or for worse part comes in, because maybe you ought to go with your spouse even though you can't stand that music. Maybe you ought to go anyway just because it's just a good idea. It's just a good idea. Festivals, parties, beaches, and everything, do not go without your spouse, because the people who are looking for someone to go home with, they're out there. They are out there. Well, that would never happen. Well, that might be true. But how many of us have ever thought that would never happen, and then it does? Next verse. Actually, go down to verse 21 real quick. Someone read verse 21 for me.
With her many persuasions, she entices him. With her flattering lips, she seduces him.
All right. With her many persuasions, she entices and seduces. That's at the end of a bunch of verses we're about to look at that basically goes into details about here's all the different ways that she entices. And reasons why I call this, verse 21, I call this the tactics of seduction. So skip back up, look at, well, we already talked last week about the immodest clothing. That's already mentioned in verse 10. Verse 13, someone read verse 13 for me.
So she caught him and kissed him, and with an impudent face she said unto him.
Okay. An impudent face, English Standard Version says with a bold face. There's a reason why God put that in there, a bold face. She's bold. When you think of someone who's bold, they're confident. They have a purpose and they're willing to go for it. They're willing to achieve it. So this is one of the things, this is one of the ways that women and men who are trying to seduce the opposite sex, they want to come across as very confident, very sure of themselves. Verse 13, what does it say? She seizes him and kisses him. So what's that talking about? Flirtatious, immodest, improper movements and actions. Turn in your Bibles to Galatians 5, verse 19. The works of the flesh are listed in verses 19 through 21. And you'll notice, depending on your translation, you'll notice the term sensuality. If you have an older translation, they'll probably say something like lasciviousness. And what lasciviousness or sensuality means, it is basically sensual, improper bodily movements and bodily dress. We, at least what I've heard my entire life is, dancing is sinful. We should, when we're teaching that, we need to be a little bit more specific. Because Fred Astaire doing choreography and singing in the rain or whatever it was, I'm not a big fan of musicals, even though I've been in a couple. I'm not a fan of them. Whenever you're talking to someone, who just burst into song in the middle of the conversation? I mean, what do you want to do tonight? Well, I'd like to wash the dishes. And no one talks like that. So musicals are they're not realistic to me. But anyway, whatever. So choreography in musicals is not the sinful thing. When I was in elementary school, sometimes in PE, they would have us do, it just went right out of my head. Square dancing. The do-si-do and grab your partner and swing her around and around. There's nothing wrong with that, because what's actually condemned in the Bible? What's actually condemned in the Bible is sensuality, lasciviousness, which is sexual improper movements of your body, and that's not the only definition of the word, because it's also, going back to the immodest dress, it's not just the movements, it's how you dress that's sexual and sensual. It's a work of the flesh, and Galatians 5 verses 19 through 21 says that those who practice the works of the flesh will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. And that's what's being talked about in verse 13. She seizes him and kisses him. She's acting flirtatiously. She's acting immodestly. She's acting improperly. She or he are doing things that God said is proper only with your spouse. But they're trying to take the place of your spouse. She seizes him and kisses him. That would be acting forward, which we've already talked about. Improper forward embraces. And we have all seen it. The hugs, I'm a handshake guy. But a lot of you ladies, you are huggers, and that's fine. But you'll notice you've seen that. Some of you try to do it just to make me feel awkward. But I'm like this, and you're like this. And what do I do? I always do this, don't I? And it's like you're a red hot stove, isn't it? I'm just like, I'm done. Why do I do that? Well, my mom taught me to do that. And why did my mom teach me to do that? For stuff like this. That's why. Because the hug that The hug to someone who is of the opposite sex that's not your spouse, the hug that is not one of those side hugs that last 0.5 seconds, the hug that actually goes full body and maybe it just lasts just a little too long, well, that's done on purpose. That's done on purpose because there's a message that's being sent. I am interested in you. We're friends. I would like to be more than friends. Sitting too close. Holding hands. You get real close and intimate in conversation, which, by the way, don't do that with anyone who's not your spouse. But you make that mistake and you get real close to I feel like I can open up to you, so I'm going to open up to you. And so by opening up, your faces just get really, really close. And then to show solidarity and support, what does she or he do? Reaches up, hey, it's okay. It's okay. Rubbing the shoulders, putting the hand on the knee, putting the hand on the leg, putting the hand on the arm, and then before you know it, there might be the kiss on the cheek, and then before you know it, you're kissing, and then before you know it, that leads to other things. That's exactly what he is talking about here. And it's all part of the tactics of seduction that verse 21 is talking about. Look at verse 14. Someone read verse 14 for me.
I have peace offered with me. This day I have paid my vows.
All right, so let's combine that with verse 13. She seizes him and kisses him, and with bold face she says to him, I had to offer sacrifices, and today I have paid my vows. Now, there's a couple of things that we can get out of this. The most obvious one is, what's the point of telling an Israelite during Solomon's day that I was offering sacrifices to God and I was fulfilling the vows that I made to God, except for the vow that I'm about to break, which is the marital vow? What's the point? Why say that? Because here's another tactic of seduction. Hey, what I'm kind of enticing you to do, I know that society and the church and the Bible and everything says that it's wrong, but you know what? It really isn't, because you know me. You know me, and aren't I a good person? I mean, you've seen me, give to the homeless. I'm a good person. Hey, you're religious? Guess what? I'm religious too. I'm religious too. And we're both religious. And so this would be okay because we're both religious and we both believe in God and we both go to church. And besides, doesn't God want us to be happy? This would make us happy. God loves us. See, that's a tactic right there. But then there's another reason that goes more along the lines to how it was back then. That she says, I fulfilled my vows and I made sacrifices. What's the quickest way to a man's heart? It's through his stomach, right? I had to offer sacrifices. There was a reason that she said that, because in that time, if you're to offer sacrifices, that means that she'd been to the temple. And according to Leviticus chapter 7, verse 15, a lot of the flesh of the peace offerings was returned to the one who was making the offering, which means that you had a lot of meat on your hands. And so days of sacrifice tended to turn into feast days. She had been to the temple for a sacrifice. A lot of the meat of the animal that she sacrificed was given back to her, so she has food. She has food, and she needs to eat it because they didn't have refrigerators back then. And she needs someone to eat, so help her eat it, right? So, hey, I've offered sacrifices, I've paid my vows, so would you like to come back to my place and just have a meal with me? What's the modern day equivalent? Would you like to come up to my place for some coffee? Or a snack? When that question is asked, we all know what's really being asked. And that's basically the biblical, the ancient equivalent of the modern day, would you like to come back to my place for a cup of coffee or a snack? I'll fix you something really, really nice. And what's the man think? Oh, I could get used to this. You know? So there's 2 points. There's 2 tactics of seduction that are talked about in verse 14. You know, quickest way to a man's heart is through his stomach, but then also, you know, hey, I was paying my vows. I was doing what God told me to do. I'm a religious person. I'm a good person. So how, if I'm a good person and you're a good person, then how could this really be wrong? Which is kind of like what Satan was saying to Eve, right? Well, God said don't do that. Well, God said if we do that, we're going to, well, that's not what's going to happen. Do you see the tactics here? Next, verse 15. Someone read verse 15 for me.
So I came out to meet you, diligently to seek your face, and I have found you.
I went out of my way to find you. That's how important you are. You know, I could have just gone straight home after offering my sacrifices, but I knew you would be here. And the temple's a really, really big complex, you know. I inconvenienced myself to find you. But you're worth it because that's how special you are. That's how special you are. What's she doing? What is he doing? You matter more to me than anyone or anything else. And why is it that God tells people who are married, husbands, love your spouse the same way Christ loves the church? And he was willing to give himself up for the church. And he has set the church apart. He has sanctified the church, which means that he's put the church up on a pedestal. And love your wives the way you love your own body. You nourish your own body. You cherish your own body. You don't hurt your own body. You got to do that with your wives, husbands. Husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, 1 Peter. And Colossians 3, don't be bitter towards your wives, husband. And wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. Wives, respect your husbands. Wives, 1 Peter, if you have a husband who's disobedient to the word, win him over without a word by your chaste and respectful behavior. In other words, live like God wants you to live. Be the proper example and don't nag him. Try to win him over in a different way. 1 Corinthians 7. You know, your body belongs not to you, it belongs to your spouse. Your spouse's body belongs not to them, but to you. Do not deprive each other sexually except by mutual agreement, and even then just for a short time, so that you come together again. Why? So that Satan does not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. It's spelled out right there. Why do we have all these directives to husbands and wives on how they're to treat each other in the marriage? Here's why. Because if you're not doing that, if you're taking each other for granted, hi, honey, hi, love you, yeah, you too. And that goes on, then sooner or later, what ends up happening is, well, here's someone that loves me. Here's someone that thinks I'm special. Here's someone, she used to treat me like knight in shining armor. I don't even exist to her now, but she treats me like I'm the knight in shining armor. And that's one of the tactics right there. Make the target feel like they matter more than anyone or anything else. Appeal to their pride. Appeal to their vanity. Someone read verse 16 for me. Verses 16 and 17.
I have spread my bed with tapestry, colored coverings of Egyptian linen. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon.
Okay. They make sure that both they and their bed look and smell great. And that's a tactic. Let's go backward. What was the tactic right before that? Would you like to come up to my place? Well, if they're smart, what are they going to make sure that their place looks like? A dump? Or are they going to make sure that it looks like something really, really appealing and it smells wonderful? And are they going to, do you think that they will have forgotten to spray themselves with the perfume or the cologne? Now, you better believe they're going to be wearing the perfume or the cologne. And that's what God is bringing up here. They want to make themselves, and if they can get you to where their private place is, they're going to make sure that it looks and it smells wonderful, because that's all part of how seduction happens. Verses 18 through 20. Someone read verses 18 through 20 for me.
Come and let us take our fill of love until the morning. Let us delight ourselves with love. For my husband is not at home. He has gone on a long journey. He has taken a bag of money with him and will come home on the appointed day.
So now the proposition is actually made. Look, I want to be with you. You obviously want to be with me. How can this be wrong when it feels and looks so right? And hey, it's going to be okay. I know what you're thinking. But what about my husband? What about my wife? You know, are they going to march in here any second? They probably will. Oh, no. Got that all taken care of. They're gone. They're on a trip. They're at work. And they are never home until 3 hours from now. So they'll be fine. It's all going to be good. See, the person who is trying to seduce, they will anticipate the objections, and they will have an answer ready to refute them. And in refuting them, the promise is made, no one will ever know. My husband's gone on a long trip. He's never going to find out. It's going to be okay. And then read verse 21 again.
With her enticing speech, she caused him to yield. With her flattering lips, she seduced him.
All right, does anyone have the English Standard Version for verse 21? All right, with much seductive speech, she persuades him. Emphasis on much. She's persistent. He's persistent. You think of Potiphar's wife. When Joseph resisted her to the point of literally ripping himself out of his clothes, that was not her first attempt. If you read the context, she was continually trying. That's one of the tactics of seduction. You can just try all you want. I'm going to keep on. And that's one of the reasons why in Matthew 18, you have the principles about if there are stumbling blocks in your life, what are you to do? If your right hand, what? You know, what is it? Yeah, what are you to do? Cut it off. And that's a figurative way of saying what? If there is a temptation, and by the way, by definition, a temptation is hard to resist. If it was easy to resist, if it didn't tempt you, it wouldn't be a temptation. So that means that it is something that, I don't know, I think if it's where you're like, I know I shouldn't, but I really want to, get it out of your life. But she's my boss, she's my coworker, she's my secretary. Well, then, if you have the authority to get rid of her, transfer her to the other side of town or the other side of the state, or you yourself leave the job, then the financial hardship and the inconvenience and the pay cut or whatever it will be is worth it, because your marriage is worth it, and even more than your marriage, your soul is worth it. Because one of the big things about seducers is they don't take no for an answer. They really don't take no for an answer. With much seductive speech, she persuades him. Before we move on, thoughts or questions, comments? Nothing? This is such a non-controversial topic, I just figured. All right, let's finish out the chapter. Verses 22 through 27. This is when the target gives in to the tactics of seduction. Here's the result. All at once he follows her as an ox goes to the slaughter. Have we ever used that term? Well, this is where it's from. Did you know that? Did you know that, hey, it's like an ox or a pig going to the slaughter? Did you know that it's talking about someone who is giving into the temptation of adultery? That's where we get it from. As an ox goes to the slaughter, as a stag is caught fast till an arrow pierces its liver, as a bird rushes into a snare, he does not know that it will cost him his life. And now, O sons, remember this is Solomon the parent talking to his children. And now, O sons, listen to me and be attentive to the words of my mouth. Let not your heart turn aside to her ways. Do not stray into her paths. For many a victim has she laid low, and all her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is the way to Sheol. Sheol means the grave, death, going down to the chambers of death. I don't think that God could make it any clearer, can he? That's the wonderful thing about when you study the Bible, and really that's the wonderful thing about Proverbs, is you look at other places in the Bible, the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not commit adultery, or in the New Testament, the works of the flesh, fornicators and adulterers, 1 Corinthians 6, verses 9 and 10, fornicators, adulterers, Hebrews 13, verse 5, fornicators and adulterers God will judge. And you have all these things where it basically says, don't do this. I do not want you to do this, and if you do this, you put your soul in danger of going to hell. But the wonderful thing about other places in the Bible, especially Proverbs, is he dives deep into telling you, hey, here's why. Here's why. And that's the thing for us to keep in mind. That's why Bible study is so important, so that we really come to understand that it's not just God saying, don't do this because I said so. Don't do this because I'm God. Now, does he say that? Yes, he does. But that's not all he says. He will tell you why. He'll give you the warning. And the thing is that for us, that's what we should do. That's what we should do with if Galatians 6, verse 1, if you see a brother caught in a trespass, restore such a person. James 5, verses 19 and 20, the person who restores someone will have saved his soul from death and covered a multitude of sins. You remember that? Well, this is part of it. It's not just, hey, don't do that because God said not to. If we know the parts of the Bible where God says, here's why, that can better equip us to go to our brethren who are caught up in a trespass and say, you really don't want to do this, and here's why. And again, parents, grandparents, there is a time and a place, and it is while your children are still under your roof. It is. For you to take them aside and you make the judgment on when the right moment of their maturity and their development and their age is, when all that is appropriate. That's your call. But at some point, there is a time and a place for you to go into this. Because things like this, a lot of kids tend to remember things like this. And this is needed stuff. This is stuff that the next generation needs to hear. Because if they don't hear it from you, and if they don't hear it from the church, then who are they going to hear it from? They're going to hear it from the sitcoms that they watch, where it makes it sound like it's fun. It makes it sound like everyone does it, and that there's no problem, and nothing bad will happen except maybe a few hurt feelings that everyone will have gotten over with by the end of the next episode. That's what they're going to be taught by the world. And here's the thing about me as a preacher. You see, have you noticed that we've spent like 3 weeks on this, and I've gone into a lot of detail? I can do that in an adult class. But I can't do that on Sunday morning when there are 4 and 5-year-olds in the pew. I can't go into as much detail as I have now. And you know what that means? It means that you can't just depend on me to do this for you. And you can't just depend on the church. And you can't just depend on the teenage class, because they're in the same predicament. They're not going to go into huge detail about this because they don't want to offend you, the parent. And so they're going to dance around the edges. And there's an appropriate thing for that. I think there's wisdom in that. I think that's a good thing, but what's not being done still is they're not really getting into why. And so parents at home, grandparents at home, there is a need to really talk about this and to plant those seeds, because will it go in one ear and out the other? It might. There, with some kids it's like that, but you know what could also happen is maybe the very next week or next month, next year, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now, they might be in a situation like that, and your teachings might be the very thing that pop up into their head, and then they might say, nope, I ain't. I'm not going to go. I know what you're trying to do, and I'm not going to have anything to do with it. And that parents, you might just get a call one day from your 35-year-old son or daughter. Hey, Mom, Dad, I don't know if you remember this, but we had a talk one time. We had a Bible study about the Proverbs chapters, and, I hated it at the time. I was like, oh, why is this happening? But you know what? I just want to thank you. Thank you for taking the time to do that, because it helped me out of a tight jam. I'm glad you told me that. Thank you. Thoughts, questions? Yes.
So I just wanted to mention on the slaughter thing, we have animals slaughtered on a regular basis from our farm, and it's really crazy how easy it is to load them. We'll actually kind of turn them out in our barn aisle, which is pretty large, and we'll put a little bit of feed in the trailer, and they'll just hop right on the trailer. They have no clue that they're going to be dead in 12 hours. But it's a quick, easy thing. And I wanted to mention the other thing you were talking about.
No, real quick, I just got to say with what you were talking about, the sadistic part of me, if I come across a video on YouTube where someone's feeding a mouse to a pet snake, I have to stop. I have to stop and watch it. And I just see that mouse, and the mouse goes up and like smells the snake. I'm like, what is wrong with you? I mean, don't you recognize what the mouse is like? No. So yeah, I totally get what you're saying. All right, go on.
In these conversations, and Bonnie and I were talking about, I taught school for about 10 years, and one of the most awkward conversations I had with a high school kid told me he had just tested positive for an STD. He was hanging around my room, and we're talking about some of the stuff in middle school now. It's really crazy how young it is, and she's going to take this away.
Well, two things. He talks about how easy it is to take our lambs to slaughter when they reach market weight. And part of that is because they're creatures of habit. They're used to the routine. I hate to say that they trust us, but they do. But when you read these Bible verses, they've done their homework on whoever they're trying to flatter, and intentionally are saying things that they know will attract flattery, or have done their homework and know routines and know what's typical and how to target you into that temptation. So there's that too. But then on the other side, parents need to be comfortable having uncomfortable conversations, because I reflect back to my time as a teacher. I taught agriculture, specifically animal science and animal reproduction. Those conversations are not happening with students. They ask questions when you talk about animal reproduction, and inevitably those questions would come up, and how we were similar and what were the processes when we talked about heat cycles and ovulations. And you could tell that none of those uncomfortable conversations had been had at home. So if you're not having those conversations, someone else is, or they're getting it from someone else, especially if they have a smartphone. And I will say, if you have given them a smartphone at a younger age, you need to be having those conversations much earlier than you probably thought. Now that I work in district leadership and I sit in on student discipline hearings, I see all of the things that happen because of that unmonitored access to a smartphone. So if you haven't had those conversations, or you're not, you need to get comfortable with the uncomfortable conversations, because if you don't, someone else will.
Very good point. Thank you for saying that. Other thoughts? We got about 2 minutes, 3 minutes left. Anyone else?
You know, something else. I should have said this earlier, but when you're getting very comfortable with that person that's not your spouse, whether it be a man or a woman, if you get to the point where you do either fire them or change jobs or whatever you do to get away from them, they can still hurt you, and they will hurt you. They will ruin your reputation. So don't ever put yourself or allow yourself to get in that position to start with. Because even if you don't commit adultery, your reputation, you'll never get it back anyway.
Very true. Very true. Anyone else?
You avoid certain places. You avoid, sometimes you're around somebody that you just feel uncomfortable about. You couldn't, if you thought for 300 years, you probably couldn't come up with why you felt uncomfortable. But if you feel uncomfortable around someone, then you should make a distance, keep a distance from that individual. But you also stay out of bars and other places where you shouldn't have been in the first place.
Very, very true. Very true. I'll end by saying this. I once in a while as a preacher, I'll have someone that will ask, and sometimes it's asked sincerely, and sometimes it's asked by someone that they're just really trying to find the loophole. And are you saying that's a sin to go into a bar? What if I got to use the bathroom? Then use the bathroom, and then wash your hands, and then go right back out. You'll be in and out in about 3 minutes, and that's really all that you need, isn't it? And they don't want to hear that. But what you just said is exactly right. Exactly right. Did you all enjoy this? I got a lot out of it just preparing it, and I hope you did too. Lord willing, at some point in the future, we'll pick this back up and go on in our study with Proverbs. Let's close with a word of prayer. Father, thank you for giving us this time to study your word. Help us to take your warnings and your guidance and your wisdom to heart here in our marriages and in our parenting and in our interactions with those of the opposite sex. Keep us safe from the evil one and deliver us from temptation and evil in all things. This we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you all.